Sir, thanks for joining us today on Leadership Log, which is a podcast for the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center community on topics of interest. And today we want to learn some things about the B-2. And so we're going right to the source. Colonel Brown, if you could introduce us to yourself and give us a little background on your career.
Good morning. Thank you. Yes, I'm Colonel Cory Brown. I assumed command of the B-2 System Program Office this past summer on the 2nd of July. This is my second assignment to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. From 2011 to 13, I was also in the Predator Reaper program. So it's really interesting to go from what you could consider the most tactical aircraft that we work on, all the way to the most strategic aircraft that we work on. I've had the pleasure to serve for over 22 years. I started out at Hanscom Air Force Base working command and control. And over that entire career, I've worked F-15, A-10 weapons testing. I've done directed energy with airborne laser. I was at Air Mobility Command doing MAGCOM requirements for the KC-46. And I've had an opportunity to work on the other leg of the nuclear triad that the Air Force is responsible for when I was at the ICBM Systems Directorate helping standing up the ground-based strategic deterrent. It means now that I've had an honor to serve on both legs of the nuclear triad that the Air Force is responsible for providing for our nation's security. Prior to this assignment, I was serving on the Joint Staff in J8, working POM and budgeting issue teams, which was a really unique time in our history because the National Security Strategy had just been published in 2017. So we were wrestling through what does it mean from a resourcing decision-making process for great power competition. And so it's a really unique space to be able to step into B-2 then, which is in legacy aircraft, but it is critical for great power competition until the replacement bomber shows up. And so all of the decision spaces about resourcing and what do we do with legacy aircraft and all those things are very timely for me getting the opportunity to work with and serve the B-2 family.
So, sir, you lead the B-2 team. Tell us a little bit about that team and where are you guys located and how big is the team?
Yeah, so the Government Program Office is comprised of active duty military, government civilian, and ANAS contractor support inside the program office. And we're spread out across 3 locations. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we have just over 162 personnel. At Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, which is more of the sustainment-oriented activities with the program office, we've got 165 personnel. And then we actually have 5 personnel stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base, directly supporting on-site to the 509th Bomb Wing for the B-2. Now, every program office will emphasize that our industry partner is a critical element of the team as well. So I don't want to necessarily exclude them because they are critical to supporting the B-2. Our industry partners, primarily Northrop Grumman as our original equipment manufacturer, Lockheed Martin and Boeing are co-located with us at the Weapon System Sustainment Center, which is at Tinker Air Force Base. The WWII is actually a 200,000 square foot facility that houses our software integration labs, and as well as the Ironbird, which mimics from a hydraulics, electrical, hardware configuration of the B-2 so that you can have seamless hardware and software integration at the facility. Our primary industry partner, Northrop Grumman, is also located at Palmdale, California, which is where the historic Plant 42 is located. They execute the extensive programmed depot maintenance there at that location, which includes a complete restoration of the jet's exterior surfaces, software engineering, and testing and development of the aircraft. So we're spread out all over the country, and it is a very tight-knit team, as well as the unique nature, right? In most program offices, you have to support hundreds of aircraft all across multiple bases. I get to have a very unique and close working relationship with a single wing at Whiteman Air Force Base. That's good and bad, right? You certainly get to hear from them very directly, but it's really good in terms of being able to have a close working relationship and talking directly with our operators there at the wing.
So I saw recently that the B-2 won the Roche Sustainment Award for excellence in sustainment activities. And that struck me as being a pretty big deal because my understanding is the B-2 doesn't have a great reputation when it comes to sustainment. And maybe that's unfair. Obviously, it must be somewhat unfair. So if you could just kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah, so when I was notified that I was going to take over the organization, I certainly was made aware of that reputation, right? You don't want to go into any position with blinders on. So I was asking lots of questions, and this issue continually came up, this idea that it's really, really hard to sustain and maintain the weapon system. And that's true to a certain degree, right? It requires attention to detail, an incredible amount of resources and time to be able to sustain the weapon system. But I think it's important to remember why that maintenance and sustainment challenge is so great. You know, we sometimes forget because of the F-22 and the F-35 and now the B-21, we sometimes forget how much of a marvel of technology the B-2 was when it was first came online. You know, Northrop Grumman basically had to invent all the components from scratch in order to build this aircraft. It included all the tools, the software laboratory, the composite materials, all of the special test equipment, 3D modeling, and computer systems, because related manufacturing processes for what we do today, where you can kind of do composite material manufacturing, did not exist. And they were basically inventing the airplane. Take that into the combination with that as soon as it did come online and Congress makes the decision that we're not going to buy all of the quantities, but we're going to have a small amount, 20 aircraft, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. Combine that then the amount of hours that we demanded of the aircraft. You know, we'd started all the way back in Kosovo, but then after 9/11, the amount of missions that we were generating and the length of time for those flights, right? If you ever run into a B-2 pilot, you can always start the conversation by asking them, you know, what was your longest flight? And you're going to get a conversation about something along the lines of 33, 38, 43 hours kind of stuff. And it's really a unique demand to put onto the human body to get into this small cockpit, basically go into a time machine where nothing changes around them for almost 2 days, but they basically flew around the world. But that requirement to fly those types of hours, to be able to generate the combat sorties and be able to have strategic deterrence around the world, that put a lot of hours in a relatively short period of time on the aircraft. Take that into account. Let's just put it in context, right? The B-2 is designed to fly over 6,000 nautical miles without refueling, and then go 10,000 nautical miles with one refueling. It can reach any point in the world within hours, and it's doing that with the ability to carry up to 20 tons of weapons, both conventional and nuclear, right? That combined mission set makes it a very, very unique platform that it makes it challenging to make sure that it remains effective. And so, as you can imagine, right, coming into the job, I was very excited to go visit the wing out at Whiteman Air Force Base. But because of COVID, only recently was I able to do that. In fact, last week. So I was able to have the chance to visit the 509th Bomb Wing, and I got a picture of why it's so difficult. I mean, as you can imagine, being able to go and have a conversation with the maintainers who have to evaluate what's happening on the LO materials and on the wings, what is something that's of a concern, what's not. Being able to apply that subject matter expertise, talk with your fellow airmen, talk with our Northrop Grumman partners, and then be able to basically take all of these chemicals to be able to recreate the materials that are on the wing. At the same time, with an aircraft that in general is fairly aged, right? Almost 30 years old in terms of operations. So all of that faces the B-2 enterprise, and it is a challenge. But that's why it is such a reason of celebration for us to have won the Roche Award. Because, you know, that was named after former Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Roche, and it's given to the Aircraft Program Office that has the most performance in the fleet sustainment during a given fiscal year. And over the course of 2019, we reached the highest aircraft availability rates than we ever had in the history of the platform. So being able to do that is because of a couple things. I would say commitment to the mission, right? Meeting these airmen, it really blows your mind. E2, E3, E4 airmen who just come into the Air Force and have a commitment to be able to make a difference. And they're doing it on a plane that makes that difference every day. And the things that the attention to detail and the passion that they're bringing to their job is truly, truly incredible. But it's innovation as well, right? So now we're applying 21st century lessons learned in terms of LO and being able to apply that to an aircraft where we invented LO 40 years ago, right? And the combination of that, of modern practices to the way that we designed the aircraft 30 years ago, it really blows your mind, the design and the research that Northrop Grumman put into the plane, that today it can still remain as effective of a platform as it is. Because I've said this in a couple of other forums, we have to be committed to keeping the B-2 flying and making sure that it remains mission essential because of the role that it plays for strategic deterrence, right? I think it's very difficult for the average American citizen to recognize that the nuclear triad umbrella that we give both to our nation and to our allies and partners means that we have a relative sort of peace unknown since World War II. And B-2 is the tip of the spear as it relates to being able to send that message. And until the replacement bomber shows up, we communicate this every day. Until that very last hour that the B-2 flies, and we choose to put it wherever we're going to ultimately put it, till that very last hour when the replacement bomber is fully mission capable, we need to be able to accomplish the mission and remain effective to be able to send the strategic deterrence message to our potential adversaries.
Mm-hmm. So in your opinion, managing the small fleet size, 20 aircraft, that has advantages in some sense, I would imagine, especially if you've just got one warfighter that you're trying to communicate with and you find out their needs directly from them. On the other hand, having smaller aircraft means if one of them goes down, you've lost a good percentage of them right there.
Yeah, it's extremely challenging. I will tell you that, right? You almost, because of the way that they were inventing the aircraft and coming up with it as they built it. Remember, these are the first 20. So as we talk about an acquisition, right? Learning curves and lot productions and the things you learn as you go through manufacturing that then improve the next lot. They were almost improving aircraft to aircraft. And so when it comes to managing a small fleet, it's almost like each individual B-2 has its own fingerprint. So that's good and that's bad, right? It's very, very difficult to come up with applicable processes for the entire fleet. We do that, but each particular aircraft almost requires a certain level of care. So we actually do that. And the challenge becomes even more so when you start talking about modernization of the B-2. Right? When we talk about the 20 aircraft, it's actually more complex in the sense that not all 20 of those are available on a day-to-day basis to be able to get after whatever the operational demands are on the aircraft. We have a conversation, we refer to it as the bird farm chart, right? It's a chart that shows where each of the birds is in any particular part of its life cycle. And AFMC, on a daily basis, actually owns about 5 of those 20 because we're doing multiple different things to it. There's PDM and program depot maintenance, where we take it all the way down to the iron and we rebuild the plane back up to make sure that it can continue to fly as long as it needs to. There's 2 in mod that are actually at the wing at the 509th, where Northrop Grumman is working on them and bringing them up to the next software OFP baseline, being able to bring in new weapons, being able to do the next iteration of modernization. And then you have another jet that's doing test that a lot of conversation has been relative to the new displays modernization program. We actually just accepted that back from Northrop Grumman as we retool how we're going to go ahead and execute that program. So we've actually got 5. So then that takes you down to 15 aircraft actually possessed at the wing. And normally one of those is going through an LO production machine where it's getting re-LO'd as we call it, at the wing. So on a daily basis, the wing has to figure out how out of 14, with all of these challenges, you generate the required number of aircraft for whatever they need to do, whether it's bomber task force to be able to flexibly go around the world and communicate whatever we're trying to communicate around the various combatant commands, testing missions, pilot proficiency, all of these types of things make it a very challenging space. Balancing sustainment for current operations with modernization for future capabilities amongst that small fleet is my greatest challenge on a daily basis, to make sure that not only am I ensuring that the warfighter can do the mission set they need to today, but recognizing that the B-2 is going to fly for much longer than people think. And because of that, we need to make sure that we always have an eye to the future for future capabilities and being able to build confidence at our MAGCOM customer, Air Force Global Strike Command, that we can deliver on our promises and they can have confidence to invest in the aircraft so that we can bring those capabilities for the next 15 years.
So you talked about where in some instances, production technology and maintenance technology has caught up kind of with the B-2, or it's modernized to an extent. Give us some examples of some ways that that you've been able to kind of change the rules and to meet the accomplishments of improving the sustainment.
Absolutely, because what you're really hitting on is this idea that from a maintainability perspective, the LO coatings and making sure that the B2's survivability, which is directly translated to its low observability and what's happening with those materials, is the primary driver for maintaining the aircraft. It's a unique discussion trade space between the operations community and the inquirers and sustainers. Do you take the aircraft down for more time to make sure that you can LO it as perfect as you possibly can? Because then that translates to higher weapon system effectiveness. But then the more time you have it down, right, that's less aircraft that are being able to be generated for operations. And while you're doing that, right, you're taking a negative hit to LO. So that balance is really what's important. So I would say we've been innovative in our processes. For one, the idea that you would have what we call the LO production machine, we call it LOPM, at the wing, where you have trained up the blue suiters to be able to inspect and to be able to re-accomplish and re-LO the plane almost on a daily basis to be able to generate aircraft survivability and effectiveness. That's one way, is to be able to have that close partnership. And then there's the longer term perspective of making sure that you do program depot maintenance correct. So to be able to do that well, we actually identified a couple of different things. One, the ability to directly put into the hands of the blue suiter how you inspect those LO coatings for whether or not it's an area of concern when it maybe highlights it up on a radar system that some adversary might be trying to see the B-2 with. We're developing a thing called the next generation zonal radar. So it is a handheld maintainer tool to be able to go up to the aircraft and easily carry it with you so that you can inspect area by area that you maybe need to spend a little bit more time on. That, you know, if you can believe it, right, being able to put that down into a handheld kind of kit for the size of this aircraft is not something that had previously been developed yet. And so we're actually getting a chance to do that right now. I would also say that what we found was, and this was one of the big drivers for some of the awards that the program has won, at the very nose of the aircraft, early on, there was a design in it that just since the beginning of the aircraft, there was a horizontal line on the front of the aircraft that lit the aircraft up on radar. That became a significant area of concern. And so we actually went through a program redesigning that panel so that ultimately what ended up happening is visually, it actually looks like a mini B-2 in the LO materials on the nose of the aircraft in order to break up the radar signature to be able to decrease its overall radar cross-section. And just that minor change really had an improvement on the RCS of the aircraft. So my message there is this idea that at this point, we're talking about margin here near the life cycle of the program where you're squeezing out through small improvements, huge bang for the buck. And so I challenge the team each and every day to find places where small investment identifies small places where you can make improvements that yield big benefit to weapon system effectiveness. Because being able to do that incrementally over time from now until the replacement bomber shows up is how we will make sure that we provide benefit to the warfighter.
You've mentioned a couple of times the replacement bomber. You're obviously talking about the B-21. We know it's in development, but it's going to be a while before it comes online. So the B-2 is going to be here. What is your team doing to make sure that the B-2 technology stays on the cutting edge?
Absolutely. I'm very glad that you point out the continuing need for the B-2. You know, it's human nature, I think, especially right in the mothership of Air Force Lifecycle Management Center at Wright-Patt, that whenever there's a new toy and acquisition and development, everybody really wants to get to that place and work. And I get that, right? It's human nature to be able to want to work on the brand new shiny thing. But great power competition is happening right now. And so, yes, we need the B-21. I think everybody recognizes that. But you need the B-2 now to continue to do its mission. And the B-2 family recognizes that how we steward the capabilities of this platform translates directly to effectively competing and deterring near-peer competitors in this great power competition environment. So I tell my team two things pretty much on a daily basis. The B-2 is going to fly much longer than anyone thinks. And if you want to work and make a difference, you need to work in the B-2, because every day we're looking at really hard problems that really need smart people to get after the problem set. And hard things are good things, right? Being able to figure out a plane that was invented in the 70s, how do you ensure that it remains effective today, given all of the threat environment and all the maintainability problems? You want to make a difference, this is where you will do it. And we're doing it really in primarily three areas. The first one is, as I've already previously mentioned, the continuous improvement of the LO materials, right? Working with our partners in AFRL, working with our partners in industry for how we can improve the materials and the maintainability processes of the aircraft, and being able to bring that into our continuous improvement program. That is something that we are hungry for and we look for every day. Every day and every year we're in this continuous improvement cycle to be able to bring benefits to the aircraft. I would say from a communication standpoint, right? Just because this plane has always been alone and unafraid, the concept of operations for our Air Force is moving to a space where you cannot think about that way, definitely from a communication standpoint. So when you start talking about how we want to be able to communicate, doesn't matter if you're a sensor, a shooter, any kind of platform, that you want to be able to move into this ABMS, this Air Battle Management System type of environment. Our communications need to be open systems architecture. We need to be able to have the ability to plug into the network. We need to be able to transmit and receive so that we are part of that entire node across the Air Force, so that whatever our mission set might be, that we are able to contribute to the value of the mission. Again, that translates directly to being able to deter in this kind of great power competition environment. That also translates to weapons as well. You know, right now we're actually transitioning to our next OFP installs that will bring on B61-12, which is the next generation of the nuclear, the next generation nuclear bomb that you can put on the aircraft. And so that's one of the elements of all of this nuclear modernization. It's not just about the platforms like you see with GBSD or B-21, it's also with the actual bombs. And so while we are modernizing a legacy aircraft, we are not slowing down as it relates to integrating new weapons onto the platform. And so we will continue to push that. We have a roadmap associated with different weapons integration in the future for how as long as the aircraft needs to fly, Air Force Global Strike Command has an opportunity to invest in the aircraft and integrate new weapons onto the platform.
Yeah. So without a doubt, it's definitely a distinctive aircraft. I think most people remember the first time they see one in person. I remember at the 4th of July on the Charles River in Boston, looking up and seeing a B1 or B2 come overhead, and it was just something that you just don't forget. So I just want to see, for you and your team, how does it feel working on it? It's got to be kind of a special thing to be a part of.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain, but you've kind of nailed it a little bit with this idea that, you know, everyone recognizes the B2. They may be somebody that's really into airplanes and the Air Force, or they may not be. But everyone knows what a B-2 looks like, right? You know what that Batwing looks like when it's flying across the sky. And it's truly a national asset because of its unique mission set, the way it looks, how cool it looks, right? Everybody knows how special the platform is. For me, I think our team's biggest treasure for how we kind of understand why what we do every day is so important is because when the commander-in-chief needs to send a very specific message to a potential adversary, who do they call?
Right.
They call you, right? They don't call anybody else. When somebody is really doing some saber rattling and we want the flexibility to be able to make sure that people recognize we're watching, and we do not take it lightly that somebody may threaten us, threaten the homeland, threaten the potential our allies and partners, the B-2 takes off from Whiteman Air Force Base and flies all the way across the world in order to send a very specific message. And we need to make sure that the 509th has the capabilities and the maintenance necessary to answer that call when it comes, because our nation absolutely depends on strategic nuclear deterrence. It is the flagship of the nation's long-range strike arsenal, because right now it is the only low observable deep strike aircraft with nuclear and conventional capabilities. And so because of that, as well as the fact that everybody knows what this plane is, it's a very, very distinct honor to work on it every single day.
Okay, sir. So we're just about at the end of our time. Is there anything that we left out that you'd like to add to the story?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I think in this time of flat budgets, right, our Congress and the nation's strategic leaders have really tough choices to make about where they invest, especially with COVID-19 going on and everybody's hurting. I think it's really important to understand that this aircraft needs to fly until the replacement bomber shows up. And so every day we need to be making choices about how do we improve the aircraft to remain mission effective. And for anybody that might have doubts about whether there's a need to invest in the aircraft because there's another replacement bomber, or it's really expensive because of how much it costs to modernize the nuclear triad, today is important as well. And to be able to invest in the aircraft and be able to bring on new capabilities, new weapons, new communications, all of these are critical to providing national security today as well as into the future. So I really appreciate the time today and the opportunity to share what's going on with the B-2 enterprise. It's a distinct honor. Thank you so much.
Sir, thank you for joining us today and educating us all about this remarkable aircraft. Thanks.
Have a good day.